Welcome everybody to the Blockchain in Energy panel. I'd just like to introduce our speakers and then have them say a little bit about themselves and what they've been doing in energy and with blockchain. So on my far right, we've got Carsten Stocker, who I used to work with. Everybody knows Carsten, from the RWE partial subsidiary Energy. And Carsten manages the blockchain and I think some other innovations teams there. Would you like to say a little bit about yourself and what you've been working on?
Yeah, my name is Carsten Stöcker. Energy is a large European utility. So we have a renewable portfolio, we have distribution grids, we have retail business, we have e-mobility business. And basically we're looking into innovation. We have a large innovation program called Machine Economy because we truly believe that there's in the future a certain type of customer group which are machines doing transactions among each other. And yeah, we're applying blockchain to do this, and that's what we do at Energy.
Fantastic. And now we've got Karolina. Karolina, would you introduce yourself and what you're doing at IBM in blockchain?
My name is Karolina Marzantowicz. I have a pleasure to lead the blockchain team in IBM in Central Eastern Europe. But my activities around blockchain are not limited to the Central Eastern Europe, and we run several opportunities engagement right now related, for example, to the switching energy providers between energy providers in the specific countries. And of course, we try to demonstrate our clients that the blockchain is one of those technologies, but not the only one, which can help in the energy transformation.
Great, thank you. And we've got Diego Del Canto from Enel, which is a big Italian electricity utility, formerly the monopoly. Would you say a little bit about it and also your structure? Because I think your structure shows how importantly it's being taken by the board of a major Fortune 500.
Yeah. Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Well, first point, when they told me about disruption in for utilities coming from blockchain, I always think about that Enel, less than 20 years ago, was the national energy monopolist of Italy. So now there is the unbundling, privatization, and we are a real multinational utility present in all continents of the world. 2 million kilometers of cables and 38 gigawatt of renewable, and a commitment to be carbon neutral in 20 years. So, I mean, this is disruption to me. We started to study blockchain 1 year ago. We were here in Consensus as a delegate, and now we are here as speaker, and this makes us really proud of that. How we manage the blockchain? We created an horizontal internal platform with colleagues from finance, trading, distribution, renewable. So we picked up people from the crucial part of our structure in order to mix together both business people, people who really know which are the problems to be solved, and the ICT innovation people. Because if you treat blockchain just as an IT, as a technical stuff, or an innovative, a disruptive stuff for itself, as far as our opinion, you are not going to be really successful. The other thing that we understood quite soon is that we have to be really open to exploring this technology. So we met almost all the most important players in this ecosystem in order to understand which are the use cases and which could be the benefit for us. We end up with an event that we organized in Amsterdam on the 1st and 2nd of February, where we brought together all European utility with the goal of defining use case of blockchain beyond the eye.
Fantastic, and it's a CEO-driven project, right? And you have a matrix organization working with you throughout the whole of Enel, with people from trading and people from all parts of the organization. Is that right?
Yes, yes.
So which I think, because some people feel that the boards don't even know about blockchain, but I think in some of the utilities they absolutely do. And our last and exciting speaker is Mark D'Agostino from Consensus, where you're the managing partner of the enterprise group, and you're working a lot on the strategy projects, you were saying, for the energy sector. Would you say a little bit more about what exciting projects you've been
So
working on.
first off, I'm not the managing partner. We have Igor Lilic, who's our CTO. He's a managing
Sorry,
partner.
a managing
Kishore Atreya. I just don't want to sell them short. Yeah, I've been with Consensus for about 18 months now. We've been building energy platforms on Ethereum pretty much since day one. The first of which many of you probably heard, this transactive grid. We built a small peer-to-peer transactive network in Gowanus and Brooklyn. Just proved out a kind of concept that we had this thesis on. But we realized early on that it was early days. Like, we had none of the infrastructure or deep tools that any kind of developer would actually want to build production decentralized systems. So when Joseph Lubin first started Consensus, the goal was to build out all these dApps in the public network, but we soon realized that it'd be really nice to have an IDE. It'd be really nice if we had this back-end infrastructure. So we started taking on a lot of infrastructure projects, all the while still playing around in the energy space. We did some work with Karsten and Energy, some research together. And for the past year or so, I've been working with, call it one of the world's largest energy companies, building out a pretty robust system wherein we've now deployed all of our code to physical devices. The end goal is to have a swarm of IoT-connected energy devices on the public Ethereum blockchain interacting with each other. Been working very closely with two of our main developers, Alex Miller and Carl Crater, on a platform called Grid Plus. There should be a new article dropping, like, I don't know, maybe 5 minutes ago. I think it just came out. We can talk about that a bit more later.
Brilliant. That would be great. Thanks. And I'm Susan Fennell, and most of my career has been in telecoms on either in-house or on the strategy consulting side. And then about 6 years ago, I moved into the energy industry to lead sort of disruptive technology projects looking at customer data analytics and connected home and IoT, and then more recently blockchain. And I was at some stage in RWE, so Carsten and I know each other, where I ran the smart team. And so I wanted to just give a couple of minutes introduction to what I think the issues are in the energy sector. And then we can talk about a series of use cases, starting with consumer-facing use cases, moving further back through the value chain. And then perhaps at the end, we can talk about, as a group, where we think the most interesting use cases are now for traction, and where we think the end game is going to be. So just to set the scene, energy used to be very centralized generation, often vertically integrated companies, which is quite common in the US, but in Europe, they were vertically integrated, and now they're not. So you often have distribution and transmission and generation and retail energy all in one kind of vertical pile. There's been a number of pressures on the industry. First of all, the need to decarbonize, which has set the agenda for renewables. And countries like Germany are planning 80% renewables by 2050. And that causes lots of issues for the end-to-end supply chain in energy, because solar and wind are very volatile. You never know when you're going to have them. And it creates great spikes. Then in addition to that, we've got the grand march of e-cars coming with Tesla, and not only because consumers care about green energy, but also because Tesla's made it cool to have a Tesla, because it has such fast acceleration. I see a smile there, and I've been, and the acceleration's fantastic. So e-cars are going to march forward, and they put enormous pressure on local transmission and distribution networks that weren't ever designed for this type of thing. And then there's also a price and an affordability issue in a number of European countries in particular, where prices have been rising and rising, partly because of wholesale costs and partly because governments have been layering on some of the renewable costs onto the bills. And so consumers are very incentivized to try to work out how to reduce their bills. And there are opportunities by having renewables in their own home, and increasingly through storage. And some of the solar suppliers in the US and elsewhere are now trying to bundle these all together and are trying to sell a proposition to a consumer that they may go off-grid for much of the time, but of course they're never going to go completely off-grid, because they'll still need the basic infrastructure of the utilities there, which then means there's lots of cost for the utility that they can't fully amortize in the same way that they were able to. So the future is moving towards distributed energy, distributed generation from local businesses and from consumers, where they have all these renewables, distributed storage, where you have storage right at the end in consumer and business premises, but also at the edge of the energy networks, and sometimes in communities. So you've actually got consumers, you've got communities of consumers and businesses, then you've got a kind of edge of a network with more storage and things owned by the more central energy companies, but still at the edge. And all of that looks very different, and it needs a new set of technologies and a new set of business processes and ways of interacting to make all of that work. So I'd like now, with that background, to start talking about some of the consumer-facing applications in this new world and what the problems are and how blockchain can address it, and then we'll move further along the value chain. So the first one is, there's been quite a lot of discussion about consumers being able to trade solar with each other in a local community. There was a Brooklyn trial where they were able to do that. There are other trials. Can I start with you, Mark, and would you talk about what the problem is that is trying to be solved with these types of projects, and then why blockchain?
Sure. So you're totally right. The grid is decentralizing. We're not seeing large nuclear power plants or coal plants coming online. We're having pretty massive PV penetration. But one thing that we're not really seeing keep up with the PV adoption are batteries and storage. And secondly, not many locations have time of use pricing. And because of that, there's really no incentivization mechanism for that end user to want to store their energy to pump it back into the grid at a later time, even though that would be extremely beneficial for balancing out the grid. So I think we're going to see more time of use pricing kind of adopt globally. And with that, you can build in incentivization networks wherein end users, prosumers, can choose to sell to individuals in their local network or pump back to the grid, and even band together in a collaborative effort to offer ancillary services, which right now it's just not possible. So that's one of the things that we're trying to tackle with this Grid Plus platform. Really, it's the idea is we're creating batteries wherein that they can act as an agent on behalf of their owner. So the end user, the customer who has a PV array set up with their battery in their house, they're gonna have a mobile app with very simple sliding bars, setting a rule set of when would you want to sell, when would you want to buy, based upon how much you have as charge, based upon conditions, weather conditions outside, based upon how much the grid or utility might want to purchase these back for you. And then basically what's on your device, we deploy all of our code, and your device becomes an Ethereum-enabled agent. Essentially, it already has private public key pairs. It could do encrypted signatures. It could send across with TLS SSL. We basically repurpose those private keys to allow for ECDSA, to allow for elliptic curve digital signature algorithms, so they could actually start transmitting Ethereum function calls, and they can basically update their balance or destroy their balance of units of electricity based upon what has happened in the previous 15-minute period. Did it draw more energy from the grid, or were you charging up from your PV arrays? So we're trying to build a system whereby individuals are incentivized to act in a group, potentially to offer services to the grid, but a couple of things still need to happen first, and there's more battery penetration that we need, and there's time of use pricing that we need. What's really interesting about this is that we can now push for an idea that we like to call user agency, which for some reason no one in this ecosystem really touches upon too much, but the idea that end users can control their own value, control their own energy. They can choose to interact with it on behalf of others, and this does solve a consumer problem with the end retailers, because currently 50% of all costs for retailers when they're selling their energy to the end users, it's really administrative, billing, and marketing. And if that's half the costs, and we can get rid of that and push all of that to the edges, the end users just operating on an open network like Ethereum, we can massively reduce the cost for the users actually utilizing that energy. So that's kind of the future we see where we're playing in that consumer market.
Okay, and so there's a bit of a step change between, because even in the existing energy world, people are doing demand response, for example, of HVAC systems to shift demand by time. And some people might say, why do you need to go that step further? Will consumers engage and be setting all these bars? Or is it enough that they've just said to their demand response provider, my comfort level is between kind of 21 degrees and 23 degrees, so I never want my house to be outside that temperature. And if you feel that you can preheat my house or pre-cool it to more efficiently move the peak of my house's consumption, feel free, and you can compensate me a bit. Does the panel feel that the extra flexibility that the blockchain version of the solution allows is something that consumers will engage with? What do you feel?
I personally think consumers will engage with it. And I was at the World Energy Council 2 weeks ago in London, And there was a shared belief among all the utility executives, energy executives, regulators. And basically today we have very, very centralized energy systems managed by centralized SCADA and grid control systems, also including active demand response. And the shared belief in this World Energy Council was that we have to move from the centralized system to more local system, to city systems, to systems thinking on a city level, even on a small cell level, because right now we are adding so many assets to the grid, photovoltaic, battery, whatever it is. And there is just no transaction layer to make transactions among small assets for settling, billing, cybersecurity. And the core belief we have that the blockchain and decentralized system is a perfect transaction layer to enable entities on a local level to do energy transactions, direct counterparty, peer-to-peer, to allow machines to do it in a fully automated way. So when I add a piece of battery, the battery finds a local flexibility market, can directly interact with it. And that's the reason why we're really pushing forward technology, decentralized transaction layer with decentralized energy assets to enable this kind of future.
And I love hearing Carsten speak about the kind of big vision of the whole thing, because I think that actually does explain why blockchain has such a role. I've been asking in my first few months of getting into blockchain, every time I came across an application, but why blockchain? Tell me why it's so special. Why can't you just use another technology? And people basically said to me, well, when you find an application that has many different parties, and some of those parties change as to who they are or what they look like, which is what you're going to have in this new dynamic ecosystem. The communities are not going to be the same constituents. There's going to be increasing or decreasing levels of hierarchies in between, and then you've still got trading and other things. And I think the blockchain really plays to this kind of multiplayer framework. Would anybody like to add anything to that?
Yeah, anyway, I believe that blockchain will be just a piece of the puzzle.
Absolutely.
Behavioral science will be very important to push the adoption of this kind of peer-to-peer stuff. So I've been studying in past years a project about demand response. So you have the washing machine, you shift in time. In the end, people don't want to bother with stuff. So, I mean, then you have to solve a real
unless the price signal
problem.
is really big.
But it isn't, because energy is going to be much more cheaper and cheaper over time. So you have a very, very small margin to incentivize people to shift their
that's not true in every country, because you have things like critical peak pricing in the US where the difference is high and then people do shift.
Yeah,
but it depends.
Sure, it depends on, it is really country specific. For instance, in country like France, where you have electric heating, and you might have also some place of the country with cold winter, then you have a lot of energy that you can move overnight over day.
Yeah, sure. And could you talk a little bit about some of your experiences of what you tried to build and what you learned and what needs to be done to roll something like that out to scale?
Yeah, so when we first started, like I said, the infrastructure for Ethereum just wasn't there. And that's pretty much all we build on, because we see that as the best decentralizing technology out there right now. First project, we were missing a lot of the tools that exist now that make life substantially easier. Probably a little shout out to Tim Coulter and Truffle, which now has 90,000 plus downloads. And if you develop on Ethereum, you probably use Truffle. Having a good IDE is super helpful. I usually wear an Inferior t-shirt when I give these presentations, because right now they're handling roughly 1 billion requests per day on the public network. It makes it very easy when you're deploying decentralized applications to be able to point to an endpoint and have all of that hosted for you. So like having these infrastructure components in place has allowed us to kind of think bigger and get up to speed quicker and fail faster, I'd say. I mean, our CTO, Igor Lilic, has been playing around with Golem and figuring out how we can interoperate with all of our energy work in this decentralized network where we can push out computation to the edges and we don't have to actually worry about it. There's so many cool innovations happening on Ethereum, and I think the real reason why this is really going to take off is because we can rely on all these other parties to do really great things in the system. Kind of as Carsten said, you have this transactional layer totally built into it. So I think that's really the fundamental innovation there. And we realized a lot that, where we failed. We built, for a very large client, we built a fully decentralized exchange. And we mimicked the public chain because the end goal of this very large entity was to move all of this logic onto the public chain. We had quite a few problems with that. It's not scalable. It's not efficient. We were doing at most 40 transactions per second when we were batching, these groups of transactions. We built entire order books on chain, and quite honestly, it's a poor design decision. But you have to make those design decisions and build something and fail to learn what makes sense. So I think we're having much better design patterns now going forward. There's some really cool protocols out there which aren't totally implemented yet, but I can see them going forward for things like order books. Like there's the 0x protocol, there's the swap protocol, both of which can allow you to have a lot of this logic existing off-chain. You can build in, bids and asks and offers with signed transactions that never actually make it to the chain, never actually have to settle until you have a meeting of minds. So,
and why is that good? Because it helps the throughput.
Yeah. So currently right now, if you want to on a decentralized exchange put an offer in, if I want to bid on something, it might cost me a couple of cents. And if I want to cancel that offer, if I'm a high frequency trader or something that's a couple more cents, then I have to put a new one in, then someone has to match it. And the more complex the smart contract is, the more gas costs you're going to incur, and it's kind of slow. So if we can build a lot of these, if we can build in a design pattern where a lot of this logic happens off-chain, and we're just using the actual Ethereum network for the settlement, that can allow us substantially more throughput increases. Mm-hmm. And what we've been experimenting quite a bit with Grid Plus is the idea of basically spinning up a hub in the Raiden network. I think a lot of this is going to offer liquidity building in state channels where we can offer all these connections to participants who are basically our clients, and we're the ones who eventually can go to chain and settle these networks. So there are scalability measures that are happening. They're coming soon. Proof of stake with Casper is going to be fantastic. I imagine Raiden's going to be great as well. And for all these reasons, I'm pretty bullish on energy in the Ethereum space, but over the past 2 years, it's been a lot of trial and error and realizing what doesn't work.
Great, thank you. And Carolina, will you talk about Tenet and?
Yeah. Before I will talk about the Tenet, I just wanted to add one to your previous question. Why blockchain for the energy market? The point which was missing during our discussion. It is applicable not only for this new peer-to-peer platforms or trading platforms, exchange platform, but even for the current business models in the energy market. We can use blockchain to somehow optimize current processes, even just in the B2B, because energy market by definition is multi-parties.
Yes.
It's decentralized. It's not one company which owns the whole supply chain. And I think that this is what we in IBM, we are seeing that many companies in this value chain, they experiment working together to benefit in the optimization of the current processes that they have. So I think this is also one big portion of the use cases where we can benefit from the blockchain technology.
Thank you. And would you also tell us about your project with Tenet and the car batteries and solar and?
So we just started recently a new project in Netherlands with the Tenet, and the project it's not only with Tenet but also with the companies on the German market. And
Tenet's a German utility.
It's a Dutch
utility.
It's Dutch, but it's operate on the German market too, in general, in the European market. And I think that the one point I would like to mention that in the European Union, the pressure to include the renewable sources of the energy is really high. The European Union, as Karsten mentioned, that also we would like to decrease the consumption of the energy at the European level in general, and also to have better split between traditional and the new green energy sources. So what we started to do with Tenet is to extend current smart grid by the new storage. And so we work together with Tesla and BMW and use car batteries. And as you described, this new ecosystem starts to look a little bit different because the vehicle and its batteries is one piece, but then we need some kind of the aggregation layer in between to really make this energy which will be stored there available for the consumers or for the grid even.
And what did you discover that you would need to do in order to turn it from a small project into a national solution, either technically with throughput or organizationally and governance-wise with trying to get enough of the right players involved, or anything else?
So right now we are investigating the solution to make it really and workable, having all pieces connected, interconnected on the blockchain, but also the performance. And Mark mentioned that scalability is important, and all of us, we know that it is one of the challenge for the blockchain adoption on the global massive scale. So we also would like to be sure that not only few transactions per second in the whole network will be good enough, but 100, maybe up to 1,000 transactions per second. This is what we try to validate during the, let's say, prototype phase.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else have any other comments on that? Carsten?
In terms of charging, because we at Innogy believe not a single company can own a blockchain infrastructure. So we basically, I think that's very important, we basically put our electric vehicle charging fleet, our entire electric vehicle charging fleet on the public Ethereum blockchain. And it's not marketing. I think that's a real proof that the blockchain is ready for production. It's ready for production, and the use case of electric vehicle charging is fantastic because there are few cars, few charging poles, few transactions happening right now. And for that reason, we don't have to mess around with the scalability issues. So which means this proof is in a context of few transactions per day even, yeah? But it's clearly showing we can move these use cases fully in production. And I mean from a technology perspective, but also from a legal and regulatory perspective, because in the end, we don't have to care about, let's say, a physical transaction, shipping energy from a charging pole into a car. We also have to take care about the financial transaction that's happening at the same time, sending Bitcoin, Ether, or crypto euro from the car to the charging pole, and then all the regulations come into the game. And bottom line, it's possible to move these things in production. Of course, we can benefit from few transactions per day. And I mentioned we did this on public Ethereum because we cannot own our own blockchain stack and abuse the blockchain thinking. And the next step from our side is now to build a larger ecosystem with other utilities, other mobility providers, so bring them on a minimum permission blockchain and scale the system throughout Europe, and to demonstrate it's commercially working as well.
And do you think it will also eventually include consumers on a sort of Airbnb renting out their private charging stations, or will that not happen?
Yeah, so we have a two-pronged strategy. So one of the strategy is to scale the asset adoption as fast as possible. For that reason, we are talking with a lot of big players that have their charging poles, because in the end, when we think about the platform game, so we have to have a lot of assets on the platform, otherwise it's useless for the consumers. That's one side. And on the other side, we are also true believer of sharing economy, and that's the reason why we call the solution Share and Charge. We enable private users to bring their private charging poles, their wall-mounted boxes, very seamless to the blockchain, and to kind of transform a user of e-mobility in a service provider of e-mobility, because he can start renting out his charging pole at home. And that's part of the two-pronged strategy we are following.
Can I just interject really quickly? I want to commend Carsten for actually going out and using the public Ethereum chain. I think this might sound crazy to some people now, but over the past 9 months or so, working with some of the largest energy companies in the world, they are no longer against the idea that, oh, if you're touching the public chain, this is something that's terrible. I fully expect many of these solutions to be designed with the end goal in mind, to either end up porting the settlement layer onto the public chain where all the valuable assets are, or to utilize it more in their build out. I don't expect just private permission context to take over in this energy ecosystem. And further, I would say it's probably a huge mistake to go down the rabbit hole and build out in a context where you don't have something to natively interoperate with the public chain. Like the amount of adoption, the one good thing I think Ethereum's really done over pretty much everything else is that they found a way to cryptographically incentivize, with these crypto economics, all these random developers around the world to want to contribute code. So now Olaf gave a great presentation before about these protocols, and he's right. You get these token holders, then they become rabid, and they want to add to the ecosystem. They want to continue to build out functionality. And that really doesn't exist in any of these other platforms that I've seen. So more and more participants and more of the enterprises we talk to, they want to build out on Ethereum and then move on to the public chain, which is, it's pretty fascinating. That's definitely a divergence from a year ago.
So since we're talking about which blockchain or whatever, could the panel give me some views as to why in finance people are looking at quite private chains, and in energy sector, those of you who've actually been working in it think that the public chain is probably going to win. What's the main difference?
I've been working in finance for almost a decade now. What the R3s and others will tell you is that privacy is really important in many of their transactions. They're totally right. I was at a conference 2 weeks ago at Rice University, and the gentleman from R3 made a comment, something like, a year from now, we're all going to be building core dApps. And all the developers in the room kind of like chuckled. Probably doubtful, because there's really no incentive for developers all around the world to build apps on their proprietary platform. I think it's great that it's open source, and there's probably going to be good use cases for bank-to-bank transfers, but I don't think you're going to get this core developer community around the world to go build out on it. Privacy is at heart for many of these institutions in the finance world. We've worked with many, like we've modeled off Swift payments where they wanted us to design the MT300 on Ethereum, and there's certain aspects of it that you can totally throw away because it's unnecessary anymore. But they still wanted everything's totally step-by-step to play by the rules, and they wanted to ensure that only specific counterparties can see it. I think kudos to JP Morgan. They built out a system called Quorum with the Go Ethereum team. Jeff Wilke did a really cool job. They have a way of like instantiating these private transactions and also keeping state of a global public chain together. I think that's really interesting. But I don't think you're going to need a proprietary build outside of Ethereum to achieve your privacy concerns. We have Project Zoe on Ethereum that's putting in ZK snarks in this next upgrade on Metropolis. I think we're going to see more and more privacy measures enter into the public chains. I mean, you can see our good friend Fluffy Pony, Ricardo, gave a good talk before about Monero and some of the ring signatures and obfuscation methods that they have. I wouldn't be surprised if those kind of act as test beds and make their way to the larger chains where they're going to utilize the same kind of either ring signatures or zero knowledge proofs or something like that. So I think it would be somewhat of a mistake to pick a platform right now that is only ever going to be permissioned because you're only concerned about either scalability or privacy. I expect both of them to be totally solved on the public chain.
And does everybody else agree?
Yeah. If I may add something, I think that one of the biggest challenges that all other industries part of finance are facing with blockchain use cases is that we are dealing with the physical assets. It is like there is a blockchain ledger and then a physical ledger, and you have to keep them synchronized. And there should be somebody who is responsible to handle the physical part. So it's going to be very hard to really remove any intermediaries in topic which are not actually monetary, which is you can translate much more easier into a total digital asset.
Sure.
So if I can have something, I think that for the peer-to-peer, especially for the consumers, maybe public blockchain is the right solution, but still, like Diego mentioned, we need to take care about the knowing who is doing what in the whole systems, because we have the physical object integrated to the blockchain, to the virtual world, and to keep the quality and to take care about the privacy. The data, like the energy consumption, they are very sensitive. So we know that the consumers, they are really sensitive about their data in this space. So I think this is the question: how to balance anonymity and the privacy. And I think that the public doesn't mean anonymous. Public can mean that we know with whom, which devices or which players we are dealing with.
I think it also goes into like how you design your system, right? So we've done a lot of things on Grid Plus in the last few months, and specific users of the system who have batteries, who are essentially acting as these proxies for my end user, they're all known people. If you want to be on our platform, you have to basically sign up essentially to a utility. So like, I know who you are, I know where you live, I know you're an actor on the system, but I don't really care or need to know all the miners or the stakers in the Ethereum ecosystem who are ensuring the integrity of the chain. So I think we just have to balance that, like what you need to know and who's interacting with the actual system itself.
Cool. I've got more use cases than we've got time for because I've just checked the time. So I'm just gonna jump to another one, which is like trade, like how price is discovered across the value chain. So today, if a utility does demand response, for example, of the HVAC system in order to bid it into the grid so that they can try and shift the peak, there's a price that the grid will give back, but that's not the total value that there is theoretically existing to everybody in the system, because there are bottlenecks in the transmission network. The company that's buying energy wholesale would also like to shift the peak. Could you talk about how a blockchain type of solution would allow true price discovery to all the bits of the value chain, so that in the future, when a kilowatt hour is bid into the grid, it can effectively be compensated by all the bits of the value chain? Carsten?
Yeah, so we personally believe in a kind of hierarchical system. So we have some local cells, and there will be a local price in a local flexibility energy market. And of course, this price depends on demand, supply, and bottlenecks in the infrastructure. And today, it's pretty much unclear what are the market mechanisms on the local cells. In addition, there will be a little bit of an aggregation play in terms of the hierarchy, going from a local cell on a city level, on a national level. And in addition, we also believe in virtual communities, so that people who say, okay, we are one community, a couple of people living in one part of the city, a couple of other people living in other part of the city, and they're building their own virtual cell to aggregate the supply, the demand, and the blockchain will provide flexible markets that are dynamic, can be generated ad hoc, locally, to match bids and asks and settle the energy of the physical transactions. And however, how will be aggregated? The market mechanisms are non-existing at all from a regulatory perspective, but also from a kind of commercial perspective. And right now, so we are working with the University of Tokyo to basically look into the kind of the energy cells, how they're being aggregated, and then to apply inverse game theory to find out what are the market mechanisms to find an optimum on a cell level and up to a national level. Mm-hmm. I think those are unsolved problems, and the combination of academia solving it, plus also building the system and learning how it will work. And that's how we see it.
Does anybody else have anything to add?
I mean, the larger market you look at, the larger the market, the more difficult it's going to be to build a system that game theoretically works. I agree with that. Most of our stuff that we're looking at is on more localized levels. The people who are purporting to have solutions for some kind of global coin to settle everything for all of, solar, I don't think something like that will work. If you want to get into like the details of what it would take, you can talk to Ryan Zurrer, who's floating around somewhere here. He wrote a really cool green paper about that. Essentially, every single country in the world has different regulations on what carbon emissions might be, and you would need some kind of global consensus algorithm to figure out, some kind of algorithm to weight all those different areas. So I think getting bigger outside of the smaller scales is going to be really challenging, and I don't expect that anytime soon for this market.
Thank you. Another area I'd like to touch, and if we have more time, we can come back to some specific in the middle of the energy value chain use cases, but these utilities are B2C companies, like a telco is a B2C company, like an insurance company. As I've been wandering around the floor, I've been asking some of the exhibitors, what use cases do you have for a B2C company, regardless of whether it's selling energy or telecoms? And I've come across a couple. I'd be interested to know whether anyone's actually looking at these or whether you know of others. One is that some companies are doing multi-level marketing. So that's where you sell to your consumer and your consumer sells the product on. It was first made famous in cosmetics, but there are some utilities in the US doing it, and there's one that's been fantastically successful in the UK called Utility Warehouse that sells telecoms and energy in this way. And I ran into the guy that actually founded it yesterday, and he's planning to put all the training and accreditation of the selling of the different layers through the blockchain. And it had occurred to me that you could also put the commission structures and the whole incentivized thing and the management information through such a blockchain. Do you think that digitizing something like a new sales process in that way could add value? Somebody also said that identity, today there's a lot of unbanked people in the States, And today, a utility might know that the consumer is paying them, but when it comes to a telco wanting to take on that customer, there's no bank account or anything, but the utility could write to the blockchain that they've seen the identity of this person and that they pay their bills, and then the telco could pay them something for that. Have any of you come across any of these types of use cases? What do you think?
Well, not those two in particular. I'd say if you're interested in identity, we had a good panel yesterday. Go talk to Ruben Heck or Michael Senna about Uport. Super cool. Beyond that, we're looking to build a B2C platform. That's kind of what Grid Plus is essentially going to be. I think we remove a whole ton of the administration costs when it comes to the marketing, when it comes to billing, when it comes to collecting bad debt expense, by using crypto on the public chain, by having items prepaid for, by giving user agency and like actually allowing individuals to own their own value. Let them house their own money, let them secure that, let them secure their own energy. I think by pushing all that, we can offer substantially more competitive energy rates and hopefully drive down the cost for many end users.
I could sit and listen to Mark all day. Carsten, do you have anything to add to that?
So basically, I think we have to watch the time, but...
Sorry, yes, indeed.
No worries. So we are looking in quite the opposite, not business to consumer, consumer to business.
Okay.
Because there's a very huge proposition that people who own, for example, solar cell or flexibilities, they aggregate the solar cells, they supply and the flexibility, sell it to a local business, such as a supermarket. And by the way, if I have rooftop solar on the supply side, and the supermarket, they have pretty much complementary inversive profiles. And so we connect supermarkets and local customers. And then we have a local proposition that's super interesting for the supermarket because they would like to build local relationships with their customers. In addition, they can put some innovation on top. So when they introduce a coin, crypto euro, loyalty coins, of course, then they can tap into marketing, and that's what we see as what's being built. And I think blockchain is enabling this. And in addition, utility can lead the way in terms of this B2C, C2B innovation, and also find new business models, because in the end, you need all the time someone who understands the energy market, fulfills regulatory compliance, can wrap around an entity to make sure this is all legally correct, all the kind of transactions. That's pretty helpful.
Thank you. And Diego?
Yeah, well, of course, we are looking at blockchain as a new business enabler, possibly, despite the fact we have not defined yet any concrete use case from that point of view. But we believe that it makes more sense to solve issues of a network of company in the same industry. For instance, trading, we are launching, and there will be a press release next week, a project with Ponton, which is a German software house, with other 20 traders in Europe to develop a decentralized energy trading platform. We will also, and today there were the kickoff, launch a discussion platform in Euroelectric, which is the Association of European Utilities. So we really believe as blockchain as a solution for peers, not really a way to develop a new product to go to the market and win despite the other.
All right, thank you. And can we have one final comment from Carolina?
The know your customer use case, I think, is good and important for the energy market, especially from the consumer perspective. Looking at the scenario when we will be able to switching between energy providers. So having this service available with my history, with other energy providers, how I consume the energy, can be useful to negotiate the prices at this B2C level.
So there you have it, a huge transformation potential throughout the entire energy value chain and through consumer to business and business to consumer. Please put your hands together for our fantastic panel.